Chapter 5. Suspicious Initials. Knowing that it would be foolhardy to resist the armed men, Nancy and her friends started walking down the road. Two of the hold-up men were in front, the two with revolvers in the rear. Bert and Dave exchanged glances, then looked at the girls. All the young people understood the message. If there was any opportunity for them to attack their captors, they were to do it at a signal from Bert. In a few moments, the men with the revolvers put the weapons into their pockets and seemed to relax. Apparently, they did not expect any trouble from their prisoners. Suddenly, Bert's hand went up in the air. Quick as a flash, he tackled the largest of the men. Dave took a tall man, while George, in a surprise move toward one of the shorter men, used a judo twist on him. The mask fell from his face. Nancy and Bess together had pinned the arms of the fourth man behind him. As they grabbed the mask from his face, Nancy gasped. He was one of the men who had hemmed in her car. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw that the man George had swung to the ground was the other Indian. In lightning moves, the two suspects pulled away from the girls and ran as fast as they could through the pear orchard. "Let's chase them," George urged. "Better not," Bert mumbled between punches. "Don't forget, they're armed." "Not now they aren't," Bess exclaimed. She pointed to the ground, where two revolvers had fallen from the men's pockets. Nancy and George picked up the weapons and flung them down into the brook. Although the boys had won the first round, they were having a struggle to keep from being beaten in the fight. At once, George went to help Bert subdue his man. Then she ripped off his mask. He was about 30 years old, fair-skinned, and had blonde hair. Nancy and Bess helped Dave. His assailant proved to be white also. "Who are you?" Nancy asked. There was no answer. She put the same question to the other attacker, but he too remained silent. "Nancy, have you any rope in your car?" Bert asked. She nodded. "There's some in the trunk." "Will you please get it? I think we should tie these men up until we can get the police." The hands of the attackers were tied behind their backs. Then the men's ankles were firmly bound together with rope. Bert asked Nancy to drive to the nearest roadside phone and summon the police. She drove several miles along the country road, but there was no place to make a telephone call. Finally, she came to a farmhouse and asked the woman there if she might use the telephone. "Yes, come right in." Upon hearing Nancy's report to the police, the woman was full of questions. Nancy answered as much as she thought advisable, then excused herself and hurried back to the group. George told her, "We tried to catch these men off guard and asked them who Swahili Joe is. But they only looked blank. I guess they don't know him." A few minutes later, 2 state police cars arrived with 4 officers. One of them, who said his name was Rigi, recognized the 2 prisoners as town thugs from nearby Lansdowne. Nancy took Officer Rigi aside and told him about the 2 Indians who had escaped. "They may lead us to a friend of ours who was kidnapped," she added. Rigi was amazed and said he and Officer White would join Nancy's group in their search. The other 2 officers would take the prisoners to Lansdowne. The car which they had used belonged to one of the thugs. Rigi ordered that the gas be drained from it, the air let out of the tires, and the key taken, so that if the 2 Indians came back to use it, they would find this impossible. "What about your car?" Officer Rigi asked Nancy. "The men might steal it." "I'll fix that," Nancy replied. "There's a secret switch under the dash that locks the wheels." She turned it, then locked all the doors. "And now let's go," said Rigi. He and Officer White looked for footprints of the 2 escapees. Presently they picked them up, and the group quickly went through the pear orchard. At the far end of it stood a cabin which appeared to be abandoned. The police tried the doors and windows. All were locked. At the top of his voice, Rigi ordered anyone inside to come out at once. No one appeared, and there was utter silence. "I guess we'll have to force open a window," Officer White said. He did this and reported that there was no one inside the building. Meanwhile, Nancy hurried down the stepping stones which led from the rear door of the cabin. At the end of the path, Nancy found what she suspected might be there. 4 sets of footprints in the dirt beyond. "Come here, everybody," she called. The others hurried to where she was pointing, and Officer Rigi said, "You're quite a detective." Nancy smiled her thanks. "If my friend Ned Nickerson was being held here, I believe those 2 Indians took him away. Let's hurry." The prints were easy to follow. Everyone was excited. Were they near the end of the search? Dave had just expressed this thought when the footprints ended abruptly at a wide brook. "Oh dear!" Bess exclaimed. "Now what do we do?" "I believe," said Nancy, "that if it was Ned who was here, he would have tried in some way to leave a sign to tell us which direction to take." "But how could he if he was a prisoner?" George asked. Nancy did not answer. She was examining the ground and the trees in the area. Suddenly she cried out, "Here's a clue on the trunk of this tree." Crudely marked, but plain enough, were the initials S.J. Underneath was an arrow pointing to the left. "Those aren't Ned's initials," said Dave. "Whose are they?" The 3 girls chorused, "Swahili Joe's." Dave shook his head in bewilderment. "I'm more confused than ever. If Ned did this, why would he put Swahili Joe's initials here instead of his own? And how would he know which way they would head?" "You're really asking me a hard one," said Nancy. "All I can do is guess. When the 3 men got here, the 2 Indians tied Ned to this tree while they refreshed themselves in the brook and talked over their plans. Ned felt that it would not be safe to scratch his own initials, but we'd recognize S.J. if we were able to follow his clues." The 2 police officers looked at her admiringly. "You know, Miss Drew," said Rigi, "you ought to be a secret agent." "I'd love that," Nancy said quickly. "But we wouldn't," Bess spoke up. "You get into enough trouble just being a girl detective." The group wasted no more time. Following Nancy's hunch, they turned in the direction of the arrow and hurried along the brook. The kidnappers they were trying to overtake had apparently walked in the water with Ned because there were no more footprints. The searchers had covered nearly 2 miles and still had found nothing to indicate where Ned might be now. Bess said her feet hurt. She had not worn suitable shoes for tramping in the woods and had turned her ankle several times. "Take off your shoes and walk in your stocking feet," George suggested. But Bess paid no attention. Suddenly, just ahead, a stone hunting lodge loomed up. Rigi suggested that Officer White and the 2 boys surround the building while the girls knocked on the door. No one came to answer. A feeling of panic overtook Nancy. Ned just had to be in here. She cried out loudly, "Ned! Ned Nickerson! Are you in there?" She listened intently. No sound came from inside. Finally, she shouted again. Then she listened. Her pulse quickened. Had she heard a noise, or were her ears playing tricks on her? "No, I'm right," she said aloud. "Listen, everybody." There was a muffled cry from inside the building.
Help!
End of chapter 5.